A movie is a kinetic art. It has to do with movement more than anything else.
I know that George has an interest in racing from when he was a little younger. That has come over into this picture, that we have this tremendous race scene.
The evolution of the pod race was a major event for us because we all sat down, all the artists, our production designer George, and we started to outline the basic scale of the whole pod race.
Decisions. I wanted the designs for the pods to look like they came from all over the galaxy. So I wanted them to be individual unto themselves, but the nature of the race to stay the same, meaning large engines attached to a small pod. You take that and make that a given, then you can sort of individualize each pod in a very distinct way depending on how big the alien is that drives it, how rich they are, whether it's corporate sponsored or homemade. After we do the storyboards, the next step is to put those storyboards into motion, and that's where the animatic phase comes into it.
The pod race started out as a collection of shots of every racing object I could find. Some of it was, racing footage of cars. Some of it was shots I made myself of my son with an alien mask on looking like Sebulba. And then eventually we had our animatic department do the task of creating actual shots.
George and Rick have really reinvented filmmaking. The traditional linear process of pre-production, production, and post-production might not have been, certainly for a film like this, the most efficient process. My initial job was to use low-end computer animation to create shots of the pod race and to pre-visualize that 9-minute sequence.
You couldn't shoot a sequence like that without Videomatics. You wouldn't know whether you were in a canyon or whether you were in arches. You wouldn't know what the lighting would be. You don't know whether it was turning right or turning left.
Speed was the important thing to George. It was a kinetic movement of vast, enormous objects going at a relentless speed.
There was a lot of discussion that went into how does a pod fly, and how the individual engines each have the anti-gravity levitators, and how that works with the cockpit and how they steer.
You have to figure that the engines are sort of infinitely malleable in terms of their thrust and their, and how much power you can get to them, how much thrust and in what direction and all that kind of stuff. And then it's tied by the magnetic energy field to the other one, so you got two of them in tandem. They lift up and they repel the ground, but the trick is that if they go more than like 10 or 12 feet off the ground, then they're basically just shooting, and they'll you can, with thrust and everything, you can get them to go pretty high, but then they'll come back down again.
Anakin flies off of this 100-foot drop. Then what does the pod do, and how does the pilot not just immediately crash when he gets down? And we thought about, okay, so he's losing his lift, so he has to make up for lift by pitching the engines back and opening up the air brakes, and so some thought went into what the pod physics are.
It's Skywalker!
Seeing a full-size pod for the first time is very exciting. I mean, it's like, that's something where you just had a notion of something and kind of fiddled with it and wrote it down on a piece of paper, and I took that to Doug, and we started drawing them up. But to actually now see a real one standing there in front of you is, that's part of the fun of making movies. That's why I'm doing it.
Now we're cooking. Yeah, I like that much better.
And in terms of this, you could just put a bolt there or something. It doesn't need much.
Yeah, we'll put some
bolting onto it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You ready? You want to try it out?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a better seat too. I want in there, boy. The seat just should be there.
Being in a spacecraft, I'm like, that's my pod?
Is it still possible to loosen these up a little bit? Yeah.
That was just fun. It was just the best.
One of the problems in terms of production was how were we actually going to film these backgrounds? We knew we could shoot everything on a helicopter and we could go to various different locations, but there was no way we could do the speed.
We began a process of essentially negotiation about what needed to be built as a set and what we were going to add later. At first, models looked like a good possibility for some of the more enclosed environments. But once they start flying, and once we start flying really fast through these open terrains, models really weren't practical.
We shot a number of the full-size Podracer engines and cockpits in a stage in Leavesden.
I give Chris a script and I say, read this off, and sometimes if it gets a little out of the way, I'll sit and yell at him myself.
Okay, you're coming up on Sebulba. Sebulba's ahead of you there. You see him, he's manoeuvring, he's flaming, he's exploded somebody in front of you, and bang, pieces flying past your head.
Try to fix it now, Jake. Practically looking at one hand. The way these films are put together, they're shot very much like a documentary film, and the action is staged, and then I shoot around it. I don't stage for the camera. And as a result, there are a lot of things that happen pretty much by accident. It lends an aura of authenticity to everything. Look up and pull back. And duck! Just that, yeah, there you go. Good, okay.
The interaction of all those things going at 500 miles an hour was quite extraordinary to see that process evolve.
George wanted the pod crashes to have much more of the energy of a Formula One car crash, where it's not a lot of flame. That's not really what it's about. It's about inertia. These things hit and they just sort of keep going, and parts shred off of them, and they tumble, and pieces go everywhere. We would give George a viewing of the very first thing we put together to get some feedback on the direction that we were going.
It's the kind of bad camera work that I like the most of all. That's the thing that tells you that it's real, only you obviously know it's not real, so it's like it confuses you in a way that's very satisfying.
It's funny, no matter how many times I see the pod race, and I've seen it 100 times now, it is still so amazing.
It is very, very cool.